At my son's first anniversary party, I gave him an envelope I had carried for 31 years. My daughter-in-law held it over the fire pit. "Is this a receipt from a truck stop, sweetheart?" She laughed, then let go. The envelope caught, curled, and was gone in about 4 seconds. My son stood right beside her. He didn't say a word. I walked to the fire pit, picked up the iron poker leaning against the stone, and fished out what was left. The key on the plain steel ring was still there, a little blackened but intact. Keys don't burn. I slipped it into my coat pocket, picked up my purse, said goodbye to no one, and drove home in my 12-year-old pickup through 40 miles of November highway. The next morning I called my attorney. Arthur Carver had handled my affairs for 19 years, and in all that time I had never heard him go quiet the way he did when I told him what happened. "Bettina," he said finally, "does your son know what was in that envelope?" I told him no. He exhaled slowly. "Then they have absolutely no idea what they just burned." Before I tell you what was in that envelope, let me ask you something first. Have you ever been written off because of what you do instead of who you are? Not your history, not your character, just the job title. Drop a comment below. I read everyone. And if stories like this stay with you, hit subscribe. Some details here have been changed for privacy, but the lesson is entirely real. Now let me take you back to where this started. I began driving long-haul trucks at 27 years old, 6 months after my marriage ended. My son Reed was 3. My ex-husband took the car we'd shared. I took the apartment lease, the debt, and the boy. My brother-in-law knew a freight dispatcher in Bridgeport who was hiring women drivers. The industry was short-staffed and he was less particular than most. I got my CDL on a Tuesday. I was on the road to Memphis by Friday. For the first 4 years, it was survival, nothing more. Reed stayed with my mother during the week while I ran routes. I was home on weekends, mostly. I missed school plays. I missed his first loose tooth. I made the mortgage every month and I put $100 into a savings account every single week, even the weeks it hurt. Especially those weeks. By the time Reed was 7, I had enough saved to put a down payment on a commercial lot near a freight depot in East Bridgeport. $67,000 for a strip of concrete and a chain-link fence. Everyone I told thought I'd lost my mind. A truck driver buying commercial property with her savings like she knew something the rest of the world didn't. I didn't know something the rest of the world didn't. I just knew what that lot looked like at 5 in the morning when the freight trucks lined up, and I knew there was nowhere nearby to park them legally overnight. I leased the lot to a regional carrier within 3 months. The income covered the note and left something over. That something over went into the next property. Reed grew up knowing his mother drove trucks. For a while, he was proud of it. He used to tell kids at school his mom drove an 18-wheeler, the way other kids bragged about their dads flying planes. Then he went to college on a partial scholarship I helped cover, and he met the people he met. And somewhere between freshman year and graduation, the pride turned into something quieter and harder to name. He was 30 when he married Tara. Her family ran Dunbar and Associates, event planning and venue management, the kind of company that handled galas and corporate retreats and weddings where the floral budget alone could have covered 6 months of my mortgage. Her mother, Thora, was polished in the way that expensive educations and careful marriages produce. She shook my hand at the rehearsal dinner with both of hers, smiled like I was a charity case she was too gracious to mention, and spent the rest of the evening steering guests gently away from the corner where I was sitting. I wore my good dress to the anniversary party. I'd had it for 4 years. It fit, it was clean, it was appropriate. I drove up to Thora's property in Westport, 6 acres, a stone main house, a catering kitchen, a rose garden that must have cost more per year to maintain than I'd made in my first decade of driving, and I parked my truck at the far end of the lot where it wouldn't be in the photos. I had wrapped the envelope in brown paper and tied it with a piece of ribbon, the color of Tara's wedding flowers. Inside were 3 things: a letter I'd written to Reed explaining everything I'd built over 31 years, a key on a plain steel ring, and a smaller sealed envelope marked BCM Holdings LLC, which contained a single document. The key was to a safety deposit box at First Federal in Bridgeport. The box held the deeds, the lease agreements, the account statements, everything organized in labeled folders. I'd planned to give Reed the key and the letter together, planned to sit with him while he read it, planned to finally stop keeping the secret I'd kept for 3 decades. I waited until he was standing near the edge of the garden, a little apart from the crowd. I touched his arm. He hugged me. "Mom, glad you made it." I handed him the package. "I've been saving this for you for a long time." He started to say something, but Thora was there before the words came out. She materialized at Reed's elbow with a champagne flute and a smile like a paper cut, thin and sharp and slow to register. "What do we have here?" She looked at the package the way you look at something you've already decided to discard. Tara stepped over, took the envelope from Reed's hands before he could open it himself. Her fingers pulled out the folded letter first, then the key, then the smaller sealed envelope. She turned the key over in her palm and held it up to the light. "What is this?" Her tone was performance, not curiosity, angled outward toward the nearest guests. "A key," I said. "There's a letter that explains." "Is this to a storage unit?" Thora said it gently, which was worse than if she'd been cruel. Gentle pity, the kind that doesn't expect an argument. A few people nearby had turned to watch. Tara held up the key like a prop. "Don't worry," she said to Reed, not to me. "We'll figure out what to do with it." She said it the way you reassure someone whose elderly parent has brought an inappropriate gift to a formal dinner. Then she stepped toward the fire pit, the decorative stone one at the edge of the patio, burning oak logs because the night had turned cold, and she held the envelope over it, the letter, the key, the BCM Holdings document, all of it. "Sweetheart," she said to Reed, "I think we can let this go." She opened her fingers. The letter caught immediately. 31 years of explanation, gone in seconds. The BCM Holdings envelope followed. The key landed in the embers and sat there glowing orange at its edges. I stood still for a moment. I heard someone near the bar say something quiet, and someone else laugh. I didn't look to see who. I looked at Reed. He was looking at the fire. I picked up the iron poker. I reached into the fire pit and lifted the key out, set it on the stone ledge, let it cool for 30 seconds, then slipped it into my coat pocket. I picked up my purse. I said nothing to Thora, nothing to Tara, nothing to my son. I walked across the rose garden to the far end of the parking lot, got into my truck, and drove home. They thought it was a quiet exit. They had no idea it was the beginning of everything. I sat at my kitchen table until 2 a.m. with a cup of tea I never drank. My apartment was the same one I'd lived in for 22 years. 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, a window that faced the parking lot of a dry cleaner. I could hear the radiator hissing. Outside, a dog was barking at something 3 blocks away. I went to the closet, pushed past the coats I'd had since the early 2000s. In the back, under the bottom shelf, there was a fireproof document safe I'd bought at a hardware liquidation sale in 1999. I worked the combination, Reed's birthday, the original one, before he changed his phone number and stopped calling the same week. The door swung open. I pulled out the folder I kept current every January, BCM Holdings LLC Portfolio Summary. 4 commercial properties in Bridgeport and Hartford, 2 full-service trucking terminals I'd developed from raw lots and leased to regional carriers. A stock portfolio built from overflow income in the years when there was no more land available at the right price. Total net worth, $14.2 million. I set the folder on the table, then I pulled one more document from the safe. A ground lease agreement dated March 2019. Tenant, Dunbar and Associates Event Management. Property, 14,800 square feet of converted warehouse space in Hartford, Connecticut, and the 1.2 acres of land beneath it. BCM Holdings LLC. Thora's company had signed a lease with my LLC 3 years after I bought the land, when they converted the building into their flagship event venue. The property they used for their biggest clients and their most profitable bookings, the centerpiece of their whole operation. They'd leased the space from BCM Holdings through Arthur's office and never thought to ask who BCM was. Why would they? You sign the lease, you pay the rate, you operate the space. The LLC on the other side is just a name in the paperwork. BCM was my initials, my company, my land. The lease expired in 4 months, February 28th. I called Arthur at 8 the next morning. Don't renew on current terms, I said. Send them notice that BCM will not be extending automatically. Give them the statutory 60 days. He paused. Bettina, you understand what that means for their operations. The Hartford property is their anchor. I know exactly what it is to them, I said. Send the notice. He sent it that afternoon. By the end of the week, I'd retained Boyd Lattimore, a quiet, methodical investigator who'd worked commercial disputes for 30 years and had the manner of a man who'd heard everything twice and was surprised by nothing, to give me a full picture of Dunbar and Associates' financial position. Boyd called me 9 days later. He spread his report across a diner table like he was dealing cards. They run 72% of their annual revenue through Hartford, he said. The other venues are smaller or short-term. Hartford is the whole operation, and they've been slow on 2 supplier payments since September. He looked at me over his reading glasses. If they lose that space without a replacement, they're looking at a serious contraction, maybe worse. I nodded and drove home. 9 days after that, Reed called, then again, then again. By the end of the second week, I had 9 voicemails. I listened to them in order on a Thursday night. The first 4 were variations on the same theme. Mom, things got awkward at the party. Can we please just talk? Tara feels terrible. She didn't mean anything by it. His voice in those ones was smooth, a little rehearsed. The 5th had a different texture. Mom, Thora got a notice from BCM Holdings about the Hartford lease, and her lawyer is trying to identify whoever runs the LLC. It's registered through a firm in Bridgeport. Do you know anything about that area? The 6th. The law firm handling BCCM is Carver and Associates. Isn't that Arthur's firm? The 7th voicemail was just silence for 4 seconds, and then Reed's voice, low and changed. Mom, BCM, please call me back. I called him on a Friday morning. Come to the terminal on Eastfield Road, I said. Saturday, 10 o'clock. What terminal? Mom, what? The address is in the BCM Holdings registration. Arthur can give it to you. I hung up. He arrived at 9:52. I watched his car pull in through the office window, a modest 2-story structure at the edge of a paved yard where freight carriers kept their overnight trucks. He got out and stood for a moment looking at the signage, BCM Holdings LLC, Tenant Services Office. Then he came inside. I had 2 mugs of coffee on the table. He sat down. He didn't speak for a long moment. How long, he finally said. First property was 1995. That lot on Stratford Avenue near the Depot Road interchange. You were 7. I told you it was a parking investment for the company I drove for. Which was close enough to true. $14 million. 14.2 as of January. He wrapped both hands around the coffee mug and stared at the table. Mom, you drove trucks. I drove trucks and I bought real estate. The trucks paid the bills. The real estate built something. Why didn't you tell me? I'd thought about how to answer that for years, not just since the party. Because I wanted to know who you were when you didn't know, I said. I wanted to know if you'd respect the work regardless of what it produced. If you'd look at a woman who drove a truck and see someone worth standing up for. I paused. I got my answer at a fire pit in Westport. He flinched. I let the silence hold. I've arranged a meeting at the Hartford property, I said. I'd like you there when I make my proposal to Dunbar and Associates. Arthur set it up for the following Thursday. Thora arrived with her attorney and Tara beside her, composed in the way that expensive self-discipline produces. Whatever she'd been told about BCF Holdings hadn't broken her posture, just tightened it. She walked into the venue space, the one her company had spent considerable money converting, the one their biggest clients booked for their galas, and kept her face carefully still. Then she saw me sitting at the head of the table. Her composure held for about 3 seconds. Then her eyes moved to Reed, then back to me, and some private calculation crossed her expression that I didn't have exact words for. "You," she said. "Sit down, Thora." I said it without heat. "We have a lease to discuss." Tara sat down heavily. Reed sat to my left. He'd driven himself. He hadn't called Tara first to coordinate. That told me something important. Arthur walked through the proposal. BCM Holdings would offer Dunbar and Associates a new 7-year ground lease, longer term, more security, a 15% rate adjustment to reflect current market conditions. Standard terms in every respect but one. 10% of this venue's calendar each year, I said, will be reserved for nonprofit events, community organizations, and trade apprenticeship programs. No charge to the organizations. Dunbar absorbs the operational costs on those dates as a condition of the lease. Thora's attorney made his objections. Arthur addressed them. In the end, there wasn't much to negotiate. You cannot run that business without that building, and you cannot have that building without the land beneath it. That is not leverage. It is just arithmetic. Thora signed the agreement in February, 12 days before the expiration date. She did not look at me when her pen moved across the page. I did not need her to. When the others had gone to the parking lot, Reed stayed behind. We stood in the empty venue space, the high converted ceilings above us, pale afternoon light coming through the tall windows. "I didn't defend you," he said. "At the party, I just stood there." "I know." I was ashamed, not of you, of what they'd think of me for being connected to you. That's worse, isn't it? "Yes," I said, "it is." He didn't ask me to forgive him in the same breath as the confession. I think he understood that forgiveness was not something you requested immediately. He looked out the window at the parking lot, and I could see him doing some kind of private accounting that had nothing to do with money. "The letter," he said quietly, "the one that burned. What did it say?" "It started in 1995, I said, with a $67,000 lot and everything I'd saved from 6 years of driving. It explained every property, every decision, every year. And it said that the only thing I'd ever built it for was to hand it to you when you were ready. Not the money, but the knowledge of how it was done. The habit of it, the patience of it." He was quiet for a long moment. "Was I ready?" "I thought you might be. I was wrong about the timing." I picked up my coat. "Come to the Stratford property next Tuesday morning. 7 o'clock. Dress for the yard." He came at 6:53. He has been coming every week since, 6 months now. He is learning to read a lease the way I learned to read the road. Slowly at first, then all at once. He is learning that property management is about relationships and maintenance and showing up when something breaks, not just about the asset on paper. He is learning, I think, that his mother is someone he did not know. Tara is careful around me now, not warm but no longer performing. We have a long way to go. Maybe we close that distance. Maybe we don't. Some things come back with time. Some don't. The first community event at the Hartford venue happened in April. A trade apprenticeship showcase. Electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians. The kind of work that keeps the world running and never gets celebrated in rooms with good lighting and catered food. 63 apprentices and their families. The space was full. I stood near the back and watched a young woman, about 30, newly certified after 2 years of working days and going to class at night, hold up her certificate for her mother to photograph. Her mother looked the way I had looked at 30, a little tired, proud in the quiet way that doesn't perform for anyone. Reed found me there near the end of the evening. "You did this," he said. "Besiam Holdings did this," I said. "That's what the company was always for." I still drive the same 12-year-old pickup. I could walk into any dealership in Connecticut and pay cash for something with heated seats and a backup camera. I think about it on the cold mornings, and I don't. The truck is mine. I drove it off the lot in 2014, paid it off in 18 months, and it starts every morning without complaint. Some things you keep, not because you can't afford to replace them, but because they are a record of something, proof of something, the kind of thing a key in an envelope used to be, before someone with perfect nails decided it wasn't worth keeping. I go back to that fire pit sometimes in my memory, not to the anger of it, which fades faster than you'd expect, but to the quiet afterward. To the drive home through the dark, just me and the headlights and the hum of the engine on the highway. To the moment in my kitchen when I set the charred key on the table and understood that the night hadn't ended anything. It had clarified everything. They called me a truck driver like it was a verdict, like the work itself settled the question of who I was and what I was worth. What they didn't understand, what people like that rarely understand, is that the truck was never the ceiling. It was the foundation. Every mile I drove was $1 saved. Every dollar saved became a lot. Every lot became a lease. Every lease became the ground beneath their feet, which, as it turned out, was also mine. Work is not punishment. It never has been, for me. It has been the point, the thing itself, the place where character either holds or it doesn't. When I was 27 years old, newly alone, pulling out of a Bridgeport lot at 4 a.m. into the cold and the dark, I didn't know exactly what I was building. I just knew I was going to build something. And I was going to start from exactly what I had. I had a truck, a route, and $100 a week to set aside. That turned out to be enough.